Hi everyone, welcome to our second session of corporate strategy. So our session is in three parts. The first part we're looking into business environment where we reach to an overview of the PESTA framework. In the second part where we go through industry structural analysis and we were looking into Porter's 5 forces. And also in the last part of the session we were looking into key success factors. Business environment. So for the business environment, we have 10 dominant sectors. So we're looking into raw materials sector, human resource sector, financial resources sector, market sector, technology sector, economic conditions sector, government sector, social culture sector, international sector, and also industry sector. So let's take a look at the first sector, which is what we call raw material sector. Companies concerned with availability and the cost of local supplies, as well as supplies in initially getting from overseas. And those raw materials are things like required as a factor of production, meaning it is needed to producing its goods or services. And that might include land costs or property rental costs, as well as other raw materials in form of equipment. The next sector is a very important sector, which is concerned to the labor market, and this is what we classified as a sector of responsible for human resources. And this sector we have included, for example, employers associations, as well as an employees association, universities, and training centers. We can call the general labor market, and also agencies like employment agencies that are like a middleman between company and the labor sector. So the performance and availability of this sector is very important. With some countries, there might not be sufficient training centers available or universities available. Therefore, the question of concern is whether that region is capable of supplying needed human resources and to develop further of those human resources that is required. The next sector is the financial resources sector, and this is the availability of local investors and local finance. It is very important to actually have at least commercial banks operating within the region where the company is operating. And this is important because on a daily basis, the cash need to be deposited to the bank system. They also need for company to raise short-term finances as well as long-term finances. The stock market is also essential for company if company is ever considers listing. If the stock market is far away uh, between different places, they might present some problems in terms of access to the stock market or ready access to the advisors and bankers and who can help the company to list the stock market. Next sector is a market sector, and the market sector is consists of customers and clients as well as potential users and customers of the company. Now, often it is said that the presence of the distribution arms and the presence of setting of short need to be closer to the end users and the customers. But in today's global setting, we've um, with the good logistics and good communication, perhaps it is less important to be located next to the end users or the customers. So next is the technology sector, and here we concern about evolutions of technology and whether this evolution of technologies will be within close access to the company. Although the technology sector resides globally, having local research sectors near the company would be important because they allow the company to develop those technologies and tailor them to the needs to the company and do some adjustment with the system integrations and meaning integrate several machineries together to help with the production processes. So the availability of the productions of these supports are very, very important and this can be provided by suppliers. Next, we look into economic condition sectors, and over here there are government sector, social culture sector, and economic condition technology sector. All we can see pretty much associated with past analysis. And then later on, we were looking into industry sector and also market sector and raw material sector, which is closely associated with five forces of the industry component of the firms. So let's come back to the economic conditions sector. In this sector, um, we always um, come with common factors like rising taxes, cost of supplies, and etc. We also have to observe the economic and business cycle that affecting the company. We have economic cycles on a global basis. On the wider metro basis, it could affect, for example, Australia or Asia or Europe. And of course, it doesn't affect all the continents at the same time. And it comes with a kind of domino effect or trench. And if one country is, they have a close association with another country, for example, Australia or America, America is facing recession, it will be having some sort of a spillover effect to the other countries as well. So next we have government sector, where we looking into, for example, in the government sector, we're not only looking at political arena or even political struggles or negotiation between different countries. We are also looking to, for example, national laws and national taxes. Different countries, they have different kind of business systems to move on. For example, one country can be a socialist country. Another country might be governed by the common or court law, or one country with another laws. So business operating in different types of countries, we need to abide all those government rules and regulations. So the next, we're looking into social cultures sector, I believe, of the society that we're looking into. So it's called social culture sector. We observe, for example, the values and beliefs of people. We observe, for example, the birth rate and aging population. We observe, um, for example, values towards educations, values towards the skills. We values towards quality as well. Some part of the word quality is might be driving factor, and consumers might willing to pay more for higher quality, and they're not willing to pay anything at all if the quality is not as high they're looking. Whereas in other countries, maybe the luxury of the product is not important and the price of the product is more important. So the quality is not that important. So these are the values then beliefs that we will need to looking into, that society will look into. So the next one is the international sector. That in today's context, we more and more firms are affected by international competition and the international sector. So here we are concerned whether the international community or firm would be coming into the specific region or a specific country that one taking off something operating in. That can suddenly affect something, or you have a big player coming into the country to compete with the local and take the market share, right? So these are very, very important that we're looking into it. Of course, different companies they have different ways of competing, so it's very good to be aware of it. So we come to the last sector, which is the industry sector. And here, when we talk about industry sector, we understand that industries around the countries, companies, they determine the way the companies to compete and maintain its profitability. And here we talk about competitions, we talk about size of the industry, and availability of related industries to support and compete with the main industry. And it is part we focus more towards of next section when we're looking into five forces of industry structural analysis. PESTEL actually represents the political, the economical, social, cultural, and technological. And some people expand from pest to pestle by looking into the ecological environment as well as the legal environment. So it could be a pest or pestle and is roughly about the same. Doesn't really matter because it is all about organizing and thinking framework to helps you to look into various factors that actually has an effect on the industry. So what you need to do is always look into the factors that actually change the way the organization or could potentially change the way the companies operates. So we come to the very important part of this session lecture, which is looking into the five forces analysis of Michael Porter's, or we call it Porter's five forces. So, what is the five forces about? There will be very basic idea underlies this industry analysis. Is comes from the very fact that the amount or the level of industry profitability is not actually random fair, and actually it can actually be understood by the systematic influence of what Michael Porter calls as industry structure. So, in another word, industry structure analysis is what Michael Porter initially used and later it's become for Porter's five forces. So Porter says the profit that are earned by the firm or that industry is effectively determined by three factors here. The very first factor is the what we call it, the answering what customer actually wants. That's a key, if you the key success factor. That's a value of the product or service to the customer. Also, if this product or service has a value to customers, then the customers are willing to pay a price of price of that product. What is it? And then they pay the price, surprice. So this is a price or cost of the production, including overheads, and this is what the customer are willing to pay for the price. The profit to the company is a surplus. The value surplus is created on the product, not the value of the raw material, because this represents the cost to the company. It's the surplus or the value is created by the company. The second factor is intensity of the competition determines the profitability of the industry is intensity of the competition is there. How serious, how tough is the competition? Retaliations of rivals, the number of competitors, the size of competitors. So also determines the intensity of the competition. And last one, the profit earned by the firm is also determined by the relative bargaining power at different level in the production chain, from the suppliers to all the way to the customers. And the light theory throughout the five forces is the theory of monopoly and the theory of perfect competition. So it comes from basic economic theories, and of course, as we know, Michael Porter is economist. And just for you to understand the different industry types that we have perfect competitions. You can see in the first one, and we have the monopoly on the right side. So in the perfect competition, there are many producers and easy to enter or even exit the industry. There are little or no barriers to enter or exit the industry. For some industries, they have some huge exit barriers. For example, in order to enter the industry, you need to spend lots of financial investment to be able to enter. But when you want to leave the industry, because industry has not many industry willing to come, so you have to problem selling the equipments when you want to exit the industry. And these are the problem with selling the equipment, for example. That those are the exit barriers. Even if you want to pay someone to take it, it's not possible. Nobody wants it because there might be some government legislations, rules, regulations. If you enter to this industry, you need to produce this amount of products or something. So there are certain constraints that prevent people to wanting to enter that industry. So those equipments, even if you offer it for $1, people may not be able to buy it. That's exit barriers. And of course, there was more entry barriers as well. Now, in a perfect competition, there is always what we call it difficult to differentiate your product. Now, what the differentiation means is basically difficult to tell differences between product A and B and from product C, or even it goes on, simply because there are so many products that are very similar in nature, and branding becomes very difficult if it's not impossible. And also, in the perfect competitions, we 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 have perfect availability of information, right? You know exactly what competitors are doing, and this month, this week, next month, and what are the problems everybody is facing. You know, the cost structure, that's this information, and uh, that's available of your competitors as well. So these are perfect availability of information. On the other end of this table, we have looking into a duopoly or monopoly that are very limited producers, very high entry barriers and entry and exit barriers. It's very difficult to enter and it's very difficult to exit, for example, capital investments and also those regulations as well. And the other one, he's like, there might be exactly um, the excess capacities, it's so hence to find a buyer, for example. In this industry where duopoly or monopoly, it is kind of easier to differentiate your product. Then becoming to the information is always restricted or limited. Even there might be some patterns, more control and more secrecy in this industry. And this is how the five forces diagram looks like. On the vertical axis is we can see it's like a supply chain or value chain from suppliers of the raw materials all the way goes to the buyers. The buyers are your customers. The buyers uh, buying from the industry. And in a horizontal level, represent the horizontal competition where you have substitute products and competing with your industry. And on the right side, you can see like new players that wanting to come to the industry. And then horizontal level, there's also the industry competitors as well. The other competitors, we're looking into a number of competitors and industry structure. So here, where the industry size or players or concentration of players comes into discussion. So let's take a look at the buyers. Buyers are customers, and customers equals of what we call it compete with industry in the following three manners. They could potentially forcing or force the company's industry to lower the prices with certain conditions, of course. They could ask for high quality and more services at the same price. And with the information, we'd actually play competitors against one another. The buyer's power is also price sensitive. So if the buyers or the customers are not sensitive to the price, or if they are sensitive to the price, then we have differing bargaining power with the company. And when they are the price sensitive, so they are price sensitive when your product cost is significant with the respect uh, the cost of the customers. So if I'm your customer and your product is only like 2% of my total cost, and my total cost is 98%, I'm not so sensitive to your price or price rising or something. If you want to raise your price by 50%, then your cost be only 3% of my total cost, which, yeah, we might just say, yeah, it's okay, let's pass it. But if your price is 50% of my total cost, means you're supplying me as a customer with the product that I need in my end product, and your product considered almost 50% of what my total cost is. And you tell me one day you want to increase the price by 10%, I'll say, wait a second, because that will affect my total cost. We can then conclude then actually the buyer's power. It depends on a few factors. We talk about buyer's information, whether you have enough information of your cost structure. By switching cost, which is whether it's easy to me to change between one product to another product. Do I have the switching cost? If there's a very little switching cost, I can switch between one to another. There is another one is the bargaining power, also determined by size and concentration of buyers relative to supply. For example, I'm a huge buyer of your company, or a huge customer of your company, and I'm a very important customer because I buy, for example, 50% of what you can produce. So if you lose me, you will not be able to sell 50% of your product immediately in a short time. So I become very important partner, kind of, and then I would have the bargaining power. For example, one day I come to you and say, hey, I would like you to reduce your price by 20%. And you might need to say yes, because if you don't reduce the price, I'm going to buy from another person. And I have, that have a very low switching cost. So you basically threatened by your customer because I have a huge bargaining power. The power of suppliers is exactly opposite. So in a supplier's power, the factor determines the power is relative to producers are same as those determining powers of producers relative to buyers. So in the case of supplier power, it is the same factor, yeah, but in the opposite manner, because the supplier treat your industry or your firm as the customers. The threat of substitute is the third. What is the third force about? So the threat of substitute refers to having a substitute products that can compete on a similar basis as the industry product. It is a different industry altogether. It comes from different industry altogether. It is substitute, but it is able to substitute for the company's product. So this is the meaning of substitute. What it is, the threat of substitute depends on the buyer propensity to substitute. So the buyer may constantly look for alternatives products to serve the same purpose, and the threat increase when the price performance of ratio of the substitute it becomes a threat. So meaning the substitute product is able to perform almost the same functions much more lower price, and the amount of differentiation is not there. So basically the threat would be high if there's a lower degree of differentiation. The fourth force is the threat of new entrants. And in the threat of new entrants, we measure based on 7 factors. These seven factors are effectively barriers to entry. So we're looking into, for example, economies of scale, a strong learning curve, product differentiation, capital requirements, access to distribution channels, governmental and legal barriers, retaliation by established producers. And industry competition is one of the key factors that actually determines the amount of profitability of the industry. Because having a tougher competition by rivals will hold down the level of profits. And it takes in a form of jockeying your position, become a market leader using tactic like price for advertising battles, product introduction, increase customer services consistently. And industry rivalry is more predominant if there's a concentration. Concentration means there is concentrations of huge players. So you have like two or three dominant players in the industry, and that is the concentration. Diversity of competitions or competitors. If you have a diverse competitors, jockeying for local market, that's another one. We have product differentiation, we have access capacity, and also high exit barriers. So these are all the main things that we need to be aware of it. So we come to the third part where we looking into different analytical tool, and the analytical tool that we are discussing now is a key success factor. So this key success factor is the outcome of the third analysis of the external appraisal process. So the key success factor is looking to two questions, so addresses two questions. And the two questions are understanding what our customer wants, and also those questions are what does it take to survive competitions in the marketplace? So, to put it in diagrammatic form, what is the key success factor analysis? The key success factor is represents a general prerequisites for success. So it represents a certain condition that you need to have in order to succeed in long-term planning in the industry by answering two questions. The same two questions that we mentioned. The first question is providing what exactly your customer wants by supplying the product which the customer are actually willing to pay for, and they exceed the cost of production. So it's not just about feature of the product that the customer want, but also determining the right price. And it comes to, for example, selling, right? So it's easy to sell, but what price must you sell in order to optimize your sales volume and get sufficient returns and profit from those sales? But in order to sell, you must have the right products. That's where the feature of the product is important, right? So, and the functionality as well, and the quality at the same time. So one key An area to ensure success, or meaning this key success factor is actually knowing the product to supply that the customer wants. The second question here is to answer to looking into the key success factor is the ability to survive the competition. And these are we can go through the analysis of competition using Porter's five forces. So these are very, very important. Together, all of this together, and then if you have a common factor that can answer all these question, the left hand side and your the right hand side, you will definitely reach to key success factor.